I found myself standing in the airport lounge, clutching my worn leather purse against my chest, as if it were a shield. The overhead speakers crackled with announcements about delayed flights and gate changes, but I barely registered them. My daughter-in-law Vivian's words still rang in my ears. "Just wait here, Ruth. We'll handle the check-in and come back for you after we sort everything out." That was 5 hours ago. I shifted uncomfortably on the hard plastic chair, my hips sending sharp reminders that I wasn't as young as I used to be. The morning crowd had thinned out, replaced by afternoon travelers rushing past with their rolling suitcases and harried expressions. No one noticed the 75-year-old woman sitting alone by the artificial ficus plant, its dusty leaves a fitting companion to my growing sense of abandonment. This trip to Seattle was supposed to be special. My son Bradley's way of including me after I'd spent the last 3 Christmases alone in my little house in Tucson. The invitation had come with much fanfare, with Bradley insisting that the whole family needed to spend time together. "Mom, the kids are growing up so fast," he'd said during our monthly phone call. "They need to make memories with their grandmother." What he didn't say was that I'd be treated like excess baggage, something to be checked and stored until needed. I glanced at my watch again, a delicate silver timepiece my late husband James had given me on our 40th anniversary. 5 hours and 17 minutes. I'd waited through breakfast, through lunch. I'd watched families reunite, businessmen stride purposefully toward their gates, and airline staff change shifts. What I hadn't seen was any sign of Bradley, Vivian, or my grandchildren. My phone had remained silent all this time. I'd called Bradley twice, sent 3 messages, nothing. As each hour passed, a terrible suspicion began forming in my mind, but I pushed it away. My son wouldn't do this to me. There must be some misunderstanding, some mix-up with the gates or terminals. But deep down, I knew. The way Vivian had avoided my eyes when they left me, the stiff hug Bradley had given me, the children already absorbed in their tablets. They'd never planned to come back. A janitor pushed his cart past me, giving me a quick, sympathetic glance. How many abandoned elderly had he seen in this very spot? I wondered if I looked as lost as I felt. I took a deep breath and approached the information desk, where a young woman with tired eyes looked up from her computer. "Excuse me," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "I need to check on a flight to Seattle. The Collins family, they should have checked in hours ago." She typed something into her computer, then looked up with practiced neutrality. "The flight to Seattle departed at 11:45 a.m., ma'am." "It's already en route." "Are you certain?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Yes, ma'am." "Would you like me to check if you were booked on that flight as well?" I gave her my name, watching as she scrolled through passenger manifests. The slight furrow of her brow told me everything before she spoke. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Wilson. There's no reservation under your name for any flights today." There it was. The confirmation of what I'd been avoiding all day. They'd never booked me a ticket. This elaborate charade of bringing me to the airport, telling me to wait. It was all to avoid a scene, to abandon me where I couldn't make a fuss. I thanked the young woman and walked away on unsteady legs, feeling as if the ground beneath me had suddenly disappeared. I found a quiet corner near the restrooms and sat down, not to cry. The tears wouldn't come, but to think. What would happen if I called Bradley now? Would he answer with fake concern? Pretend there had been some mistake? Or would he finally tell the truth, that I was a burden they'd decided to shed? As I sat there, watching travelers hurry by with their purposeful strides, something shifted inside me. A lifetime of accommodating others, of making myself small, to fit into the spaces they allowed me, suddenly felt like a heavy coat I could finally remove. I looked up at the departure board, its destinations blinking like possibilities. Chicago, Denver, Las Vegas, San Diego. I'd visited none of them. James and I had always planned to travel after retirement, but cancer had taken him before we could. Since then, I'd barely left Tucson, becoming exactly what my children expected. A predictable, sedentary old woman whose world had shrunk to the size of her living room. My eyes settled on one destination, Portland. I'd never been there, had no connections. Perfect. I walked to the counter with a determination I hadn't felt in years. One ticket to Portland, please. One way. The ticket agent didn't bat an eye. Departing today? Yes, I said. As soon as possible. There was a flight leaving in 2 hours. I paid with my credit card, the one Bradley didn't know about, the one tied to the account where I'd been quietly depositing small amounts from each Social Security check. It wasn't much, but it was mine. While waiting for my flight, I turned off my phone. If they had decided I wasn't worth waiting for, then they weren't worth my worry. I sat in the boarding area, watching families and wondering how many secrets lay beneath their smiling surfaces, how many other women my age had been discarded when they were no longer useful, and how many had found the courage to walk away. As the plane ascended into the clouds, I pressed my forehead against the cool window and watched Tucson shrink beneath me. I thought about the house I was leaving behind, with its familiar corners and sunlit kitchen. I thought about the garden I'd tended for decades, the neighbors who checked in occasionally, but none of it held me the way it once had. Instead of grief, I felt something unexpected, relief. Was I running away? Perhaps. But after years of staying put, of being exactly where others expected me to be, running felt remarkably like freedom. What awaited me in Portland I couldn't say, but as the desert gave way to mountains, then forests, I realized something important. Whatever came next would be my choice, my life, not an afterthought in someone else's story. The flight attendant stopped beside my seat, her smile professional but kind. First time to Portland? She asked, noticing my focus on the window. First time anywhere in a very long time, I replied. She seemed to understand more than I'd said. Well, welcome to your adventure then. Adventure. The word settled around me like a promise. After decades of being someone's wife, someone's mother, someone's grandmother, I was finally just Ruth, a woman with an unknown destination and no one waiting for her arrival. The thought should have terrified me. Instead, I felt myself smile. What happens to a woman who's been abandoned by her family? Does she shrivel up and disappear? Or does she finally begin to live? As Oregon's lush landscape appeared below us, I was determined to find out, because sometimes being left behind is actually being set free. I never imagined at 75 that I would be starting over, but as the plane began its descent toward Portland, I realized I wasn't just running from something, I was running toward someone I'd lost long ago, myself. The Portland airport was smaller than I expected, less chaotic than Tucson's. I followed the flow of passengers through the terminal, hyper-aware of being alone. My carry-on bag, the only luggage I'd brought for what was supposed to be a week-long trip, felt suddenly inadequate. 3 changes of clothes, basic toiletries, my medications, and a paperback mystery I'd planned to read on the flight to Seattle. Not exactly the provisions for building a new life. Outside, the air hit me like a revelation. Cool, damp, tinged with pine, and something earthy. So different from the dry heat I'd grown accustomed to. A light drizzle was falling, and I stood under the terminal awning, watching people hail taxis or greet waiting family members. No one was waiting for me. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. Need a ride, ma'am? A taxi driver had noticed me standing there uncertain. Yes, I said, then realized I had no destination to give him. Is there an inexpensive hotel near downtown? Something clean and safe? He nodded, opening the door for me. I know just the place. Not fancy, but decent. As we drove through rain-slicked streets, Portland revealed itself in glimpses, bridges spanning a wide river, tall trees lining residential neighborhoods, old brick buildings nestled against modern glass structures. Everything was so green, so vibrant compared to the desert landscapes I'd known for decades. First time in Portland? The driver asked, catching my wide-eyed gaze in the rearview mirror. Is it that obvious? He chuckled. You've got that look. Taking a vacation? Something like that, I replied. not ready to explain what I myself didn't fully understand. The hotel was indeed modest, a 3-story brick building with a small lobby and a sign advertising weekly rates. Perfect. I paid for 3 nights, all I dared commit to with my limited funds. The room was clean, but Spartan. A double bed, a small desk, a dresser with a TV on top, and a bathroom with a shower stall. I set my bag on the bed and stood in the center of the room, suddenly overwhelmed by the enormity of what I'd done. I, Ruth Wilson, a 75-year-old widow who had lived in the same house for over 40 years, had just fled across state lines with nothing but a carry-on bag and a dwindling bank account. What on earth was I thinking? Panic rose in my chest, threatening to choke me. I sat heavily on the edge of the bed, trying to steady my breathing. What if this was a terrible mistake? What if I couldn't find anywhere to live? Couldn't support myself? What if I got sick in this unfamiliar city? As if summoned by my anxiety, my phone, which I'd turned back on while waiting for the taxi, began to ring. Bradley's name flashed on the screen. My hand hovered over it, tempted to answer, to hear what excuse he'd concocted. But something stopped me. If I answered now, if I let him know how scared I was, I'd be right back where I started. Dependent, dismissed, defined by my relationship to others. I silenced the phone and placed it face down on the nightstand. Then I walked to the window and looked out at the rain-washed street below. People hurried past under umbrellas, going about lives that had nothing to do with mine. In this city I was no one's mother, no one's grandmother, no one's burden. Just a stranger with a future as blank as the wall above my bed. The freedom of that thought was dizzying. I'd spent so many years living for others, raising Bradley after James died, being the helpful mother-in-law who never interfered, even when Vivian was clearly making mistakes with the children, staying in my little house so I wouldn't disrupt their lives. When had I last done something purely for myself? I couldn't remember. And that, perhaps more than anything else, convinced me that I'd made the right choice. That night, I slept fitfully, dreams of airports and waiting rooms intruding on my rest. I woke early, disoriented by the unfamiliar room until memory rushed back. I was in Portland, alone, by choice. The hotel offered a simple continental breakfast. I filled a plate with a muffin and some fruit, then took a seat by the window. An older man with a newspaper nodded to me as I sat down. "Morning," he said. "Visiting or staying?" The question caught me off guard. "I'm not sure yet," I answered honestly. He smiled, revealing a gap between his front teeth. "Best city in the country if you're not sure yet. Name's Howard, by the way." "Ruth," I replied, surprising myself by engaging. In Tucson, I rarely spoke to strangers. Howard, it turned out, had moved to Portland 15 years ago, after his wife died. "Couldn't stand our house without her," he explained. "Too many ghosts, needed somewhere new." I nodded, understanding completely. "You'll want to check the community boards," he continued, gesturing with his coffee cup. "Library, grocery stores, that coffee shop down on Burnside. People post rooms for rent, sometimes jobs too. More personal than those internet sites." "Thank you," I said, genuinely grateful for the advice. "I'll do that." After breakfast, I set out with a borrowed umbrella from the front desk. The rain had stopped, but the sky remained overcast. The air misty. I found the library Howard had mentioned. A beautiful old building with stone columns and wide steps. Inside, it was warm and quiet, with that distinctive smell of books and paper that libraries always have. The community board near the entrance was covered with colorful flyers and index cards. I scanned them slowly. Roommates wanted, items for sale, language exchange, book clubs, job postings. One small white card caught my eye. Room for rent in quiet home. Private bath. 650 mature person preferred. No smoking, no pets. Reference required. It was in a neighborhood called Selwood, which meant nothing to me, but the mature person preferred seemed promising. Many of the other housing notices specifically mentioned seeking young professionals or students. I copied down the phone number and address, then continued exploring the board. Another notice advertised for a part-time helper at a bakery 3 mornings a week. Experience preferred, but willing to train the right person. Seniors welcome. I took that information too, though I'd never worked in food service. But I'd been baking since I was tall enough to reach the counter. And I needed income. Armed with these possibilities, I spent the rest of the day exploring the neighborhood around the library. I found the coffee shop Howard had mentioned, and a small grocery store with another community board. More leads, more options. With each step, each interaction with shopkeepers or baristas, I felt less like an intruder and more like someone who might belong. By late afternoon, rain was falling again, and I retreated to my hotel room. I sat on the bed, staring at the phone numbers I'd collected, calling strangers, asking for a chance. It had been so long since I'd had to prove my worth to anyone. In recent years, I'd been defined primarily by what I could do for my family: babysitting, cooking holiday meals, being an emergency contact when Vivian and Bradley had conflicts in their schedules. My phone had accumulated more missed calls and messages throughout the day. I ignored them all and instead dialed the number for the room rental. A woman answered on the third ring. "Hello?" Her voice was deep, slightly gravelly. "Hello," I said, suddenly nervous. "I'm calling about the room for rent." "I saw your notice at the library. It's still available," she said. "Tell me about yourself." What could I say? That I was a runaway grandmother? A woman who'd abandoned her previous life with less planning than most people put into a weekend trip? "My name is Ruth Wilson," I began. "I'm 75, recently relocated to Portland. I'm quiet, clean, and can provide the first and last month's rent immediately." This last part was a stretch. It would nearly deplete my savings, but it felt important to appear stable. The woman said. "You have references?" "I owned my own home in Tucson for 40 years, I said. "I can give you my bank information and my previous address for verification." A pause. "Why'd you leave Tucson?" The question was direct, unexpected. I could have fabricated something but found myself unwilling to begin this new life with lies. "My family left me at the airport," I said simply. "I decided it was time for a change." To my surprise, she laughed. A genuine, appreciative sound. "Well, that's the most honest answer I've heard in a while. I'm Margot Fleming. You want to see the place tomorrow?" We arranged a time, and I hung up feeling both terrified and hopeful. Then I called about the bakery position. The owner, a man named Daniel, asked me to come by the next day as well. "Just to chat," he said. "See if it might be a good fit." That night, I lay awake thinking about these 2 appointments. My first steps toward building something new. Outside, rain tapped against the window like gentle encouragement. In the morning, I would begin to discover if Portland could become more than an escape, if it could become home. The phone on the nightstand remained silent. I'd turned it off again, unwilling to let Bradley's voice or messages intrude on this fragile new beginning. Whatever he had to say could wait until I was ready to hear it. For the first time in longer than I could remember, my life was moving according to my own timetable, not anyone else's. As I drifted toward sleep, I wondered what tomorrow would bring, and realized, with a start, that I was actually looking forward to finding out. When was the last time I'd felt that way? That simple curiosity about what came next? I couldn't remember, but I hoped it was a feeling I could get used to again. Morning came with watery sunlight filtering through the gauzy hotel curtains. I dressed carefully in the nicest clothes I'd packed, black slacks and a blue blouse that James had always said brought out my eyes. I applied a touch of lipstick, ran a brush through my silver hair, and studied my reflection. The woman looking back at me appeared both familiar and strange, the same features I'd known all my life, but somehow different, more alert perhaps, more present. My first appointment was with Margot Fleming at 10 o'clock. I'd studied a map of Portland and figured out the bus route to her neighborhood, allowing extra time for getting lost. To my surprise, the public transportation system was easy to navigate with helpful drivers and clear signage. I arrived in Selwood with 20 minutes to spare and spent the time walking around the neighborhood. It was charming, tree-lined streets with a mix of older homes and small apartment buildings, corner stores and cafes. Not too crowded, not too empty. I could imagine myself walking these streets daily, becoming a regular at that little coffee shop or browsing in the second-hand bookstore I passed. Margot's house was a modest craftsman, with a deep porch and well-tended garden. Wind chimes tinkled softly near the front door. I climbed the steps and rang the bell, heart pounding with a mixture of anxiety and anticipation. The woman who opened the door was not what I'd expected. Margot was tall and angular, with short gray hair styled in a modern cut. She wore jeans and a flannel shirt rolled up at the sleeves, revealing forearms covered in colorful tattoos. She appeared to be in her 60s, but carried herself with the energy of someone much younger. "Ruth?" she asked, extending a hand. "Yes, that's right." Her handshake was firm. "Come on in. I just made coffee." The inside of the house was as unexpected as Margot herself. What looked traditional from the outside was decidedly eclectic within, walls painted in rich colors, art hanging everywhere, bookshelves overflowing with volumes on every subject imaginable. It wasn't messy exactly, but fully lived in, each space revealing something about its occupant. "You have a lovely home," I said, meaning it. "Thanks. Been here 20 years now? Made it my own." She led me through to a sunny kitchen at the back of the house. "Coffee? Tea?" "Coffee would be wonderful." She poured 2 mugs and set one before me. "So, airport, huh?" I hadn't expected her to circle back to that so quickly. "Yes. My son and his wife, they said they'd come back for me after checking in. They didn't." Margot nodded, not with pity but with understanding. "People can be real disappointments sometimes." "Yes," I agreed. "They can. The room's upstairs," she said, changing subjects. "Got its own bathroom, small but functional. Used to be my daughter's before she moved to Chicago. Been renting it out the past few years. Last tenant was a grad student, very quiet, stayed 2 years until she finished her program." She showed me upstairs to a good-sized bedroom with slanted ceilings and a dormer window overlooking the backyard. The walls were a soft yellow, the furniture simple but good quality, a double bed, a dresser, a small desk under the window. The attached bathroom was indeed small, but had everything necessary. "It's perfect," I said, and realized I meant it. Back downstairs, Margot laid out the terms: $600 monthly utilities included, shared kitchen and living spaces, laundry in the basement. First and last month's rent up front, plus a small security deposit. "When would you want to move in?" she asked. "As soon as possible," I admitted. "I'm currently staying at a hotel." She studied me for a moment. "You really did just arrive in Portland, didn't you? With nothing planned?" I nodded, feeling suddenly foolish. What must she think of me? But Margot surprised me. "Good for you," she said. "Takes guts to shake things up at our age. Everyone expects us to just fade into the background." She sipped her coffee. "I've got a good feeling about you, Ruth. Room's yours if you want it. You can move in tomorrow." Relief flooded through me. "Thank you. I'd like that very much." We spent another hour talking, getting to know each other. Margot, I learned, had been a high school art teacher before retiring. She was divorced. Best decision I ever made. With 1 daughter and 2 grandchildren she saw a few times a year. She was active in community theater, hosted a monthly book club, and made jewelry that she sold at local craft fairs. "What about you?" she asked. "Besides being abandoned at airports, what's your story?" I found myself telling her more than I'd planned, about James's death 15 years ago, about how Bradley had gradually included me less and less in family events, about how I'd filled my days with volunteer work and gardening because it seemed like all that was left for a woman my age. Well, Margot said when I finished, sounds like you're due for a second act. Portland's a good place for that. My next appointment was at the bakery at 1 o'clock. Margot gave me directions. It was within walking distance, and I set off feeling lighter than I had in days. I had a place to live, a potential landlord who seemed more like a potential friend, and the beginning of a path forward. The bakery, called Sweetleaf, occupied a corner storefront with large windows and a cheerful green awning. The smell of fresh bread and sugar enveloped me as I pushed open the door. Triggering a small bell, the space inside was warm and inviting, with wooden tables, a glass display case filled with pastries, and shelves of bread behind the counter. A man looked up from where he was arranging cookies on a tray. Be right with you? I took a seat at one of the tables and observed the operation. Besides the man, there was a young woman at the register, helping customers, and another person visible in the back kitchen. The place had a steady stream of patrons, but didn't feel hectic. After a few minutes, the man approached my table, wiping flour-covered hands on his apron. He was about 50, I guessed, with kind eyes and laugh lines. You must be Ruth, he said. I'm Daniel. Thanks for coming in. We spoke for nearly an hour. The position, he explained, was 3 mornings a week, from 5 a.m. until 10 a.m., primarily helping with the morning baking, mixing doughs, shaping loaves, preparing simple pastries. He needed someone reliable who could work independently once trained. I'll be honest, I said. I've never worked in a commercial kitchen, but I've been baking all my life. Daniel smiled. Home skills often translate well, and I'm more concerned with finding someone who'll actually show up consistently than someone with a fancy culinary degree. He leaned forward. Why Portland? You said you just moved here? Again, I found myself telling the airport story, though in a more abbreviated version. Daniel listened without interrupting. That took courage, he said when I finished. Starting over isn't easy at any age. It was either that or disappear, I replied. He nodded as if that made perfect sense. Well, Ruth, I'd like to offer you a trial period. 2 weeks. If it works out for both of us, we'll make it permanent. Pay is $15 an hour to start, plus you can take home any unsold bread at the end of your shift. When can you begin? The question sent a thrill through me. Someone wanted to hire me not as a favor but because they thought I could contribute something valuable. I'm moving into a permanent place tomorrow, I said. I could start the day after? Perfect, Daniel said, standing and extending his hand. Welcome to Sweetleaf. As I walked back to the bus stop, my steps were lighter than they had been in years. In a single day, I'd secured housing and employment, the 2 most essential elements of building a new life. The future that had seemed so terrifyingly blank yesterday was beginning to fill with possibilities. On the bus ride back to the hotel, I allowed myself to think of Bradley for the first time that day. By now, he must be frantic, or at least I hoped he was. Part of me wanted him to worry, to feel even a fraction of the abandonment I'd experienced. But another part, the part that would always be a mother, hated the thought of causing him pain. I turned my phone on briefly. 27 missed calls, 13 voicemails, 34 text messages. The most recent text, from just an hour ago, read, Mom, please call us. We're filing a missing person report if we don't hear from you today. That made me pause. A missing person report would complicate things. I didn't want police resources wasted on someone who wasn't actually missing. I composed a brief text. I am safe. I've moved away. I need time. Please don't file any reports or try to find me. I'll contact you when I'm ready. I sent it, then immediately turned the phone off again before he could call. It was all I could offer him right now, the knowledge that I was alive and had left by choice. Anything more would risk being pulled back into the dynamic I was trying to escape. Back at the hotel, I began packing my few belongings, preparing for tomorrow's move. I'd need to buy some essentials, more clothes, toiletries, perhaps a few items to make Margot's room feel like my own. But those were practical concerns, the kind I knew how to handle. What I wasn't sure how to manage was the emotional landscape I was navigating. Every new connection, every decision made on my own behalf, felt simultaneously exhilarating and terrifying. I was stepping into an identity I'd never fully inhabited, not as someone's wife or mother or grandmother, but simply as Ruth, a woman with her own wants and needs, her own path to forge. I sat on the edge of the hotel bed, suddenly overwhelmed by it all. What if I failed? What if this burst of independence was nothing more than a desperate reaction to hurt feelings? What if, a month from now, I regretted leaving everything behind? But as quickly as these doubts surfaced, I remembered the hours spent in that airport lounge, watching the minutes tick by on my watch, the growing certainty that my own son had decided I wasn't worth coming back for. I remembered decades of making myself smaller, less demanding, less present in my own life to accommodate others. And I knew, with bone-deep certainty, that going back wasn't an option. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they were mine to face on my terms. For perhaps the first time in my adult life, I answered to no one but myself. The thought was so powerful that I found myself smiling in the empty hotel room, a solitary woman on the cusp of a new beginning. Tomorrow, I would move into Margot's house. The day after, I would begin my job at Sweetleaf. And after that, the future stretched before me, unmapped but full of potential. At 75, I was finally writing my own story, and I couldn't wait to discover what happened next. As I stood in Margot's guest room, my room now, arranging my meager belongings, I realized how little I actually possessed. 3 outfits, basic toiletries, a paperback novel, my medication, and a handful of personal items I'd had in my purse. James's pocket watch, a small photo album, my wedding ring, which I'd stopped wearing years ago but carried with me always. My entire life, reduced to what could fit in a carry-on bag. Not much to unpack, Margot observed from the doorway, not unkindly. I wasn't exactly planning to relocate when I left home, I admitted. I suppose I'll need to go shopping. There's a good thrift store 3 blocks down, she suggested. Quality stuff, decent prices, and I've got extra towels and linens you can use until you get your own. Her generosity touched me. Thank you, Margot, for everything. She waved a hand dismissively. I've been where you are. Not exactly the same circumstances, but I know what it's like to start over with nothing. She paused. Look, there's a neighborhood block party tonight. Just a potluck in the park down the street. Good way to meet some folks. You interested? The old Ruth would have declined, claiming fatigue or some other excuse. But the woman I was becoming, the one who'd bought a one-way ticket to an unknown city, found herself nodding. I'd like that. I don't have anything to bring though. Don't worry about it. I've got a pasta salad that feeds an army. After Margot left, I stood by the dormer window, looking out at the unfamiliar street. Trees swayed gently in the breeze, and somewhere a dog barked. Normal sounds, everyday life, continuing as it always had. But for me, everything was new, seen through eyes that were suddenly wide open. After years of looking down, looking away, looking anywhere but at my own needs, I spent the afternoon at the thrift store Margot had recommended, selecting a few essential clothing items and a warm jacket for the cooler Portland climate. The store also had housewares, and I found myself drawn to a small ceramic vase in deep blue. It was the first thing I'd bought purely because it pleased me and longer than I could remember. Nice choice, the cashier commented as she wrapped it in paper. That glaze is gorgeous. It reminded me of the ocean, I said. James and I had honeymooned by the sea. One of my happiest memories. The block party was in full swing when Margot and I arrived at the park around 6. Tables had been set up under the trees, loaded with dishes brought by neighbors. Children played on the grass while adults mingled in small groups, paper plates in hand. Come on, Margot said, guiding me toward a table where a silver-haired woman was arranging cups. Elaine, this is Ruth, my new housemate. Ruth. Elaine runs the community garden 2 streets over. Elaine smiled warmly. Welcome to the neighborhood. Where are you from originally? And just like that, I was drawn into conversations, introduced to one person after another. No one seemed surprised or put off by my age. In fact, there were quite a few residents in their 60s and 70s. Martin and his husband David had retired here from Chicago. 5 years ago, Sophia was a widow who taught piano lessons from her home. Walter walked with a cane, but boasted about still being able to beat his grandson at chess. How are you finding Portland so far? Asked a woman named Claire, as we stood in line for dessert. Welcoming, I replied honestly. I wasn't sure what to expect. Oh, we love newcomers, she said. Especially ones with stories. And we all have stories, don't we? There was something freeing about being among people who had no preconceptions about me. No history to compare against my current self. No one here remembered me as James's wife or Bradley's mother. No one expected me to be the quiet grandmother who always volunteered to babysit but never imposed. Here I could be whoever I chose to be. As darkness fell, someone started a portable fire pit, and people gathered around with cups of hot cider. Martin pulled out a guitar and began playing folk songs. Others joined in singing, their voices blending in the cool evening air. I stood slightly apart, watching this community, my new community, perhaps enjoy each other's company. Margot appeared at my side, offering a steaming cup. Penny for your thoughts? She asked. I was just thinking how strange life is, I said. 3 days ago, I was sitting in an airport, feeling invisible and discarded, and now I'm here, in a city I'd never even visited, surrounded by strangers who've been kinder to me than my own family was. Margot nodded thoughtfully. People say it takes a lifetime to really know someone. I say it takes about 3 minutes to know if someone's worth knowing better. She sipped her cider. These are good folks, not perfect, but good. You'll fit in just fine. As we walked home later, the streets quiet under the street lamps, I felt a curious sensation, like puzzle pieces shifting, rearranging themselves into a new picture. The hurt of Bradley's betrayal was still there, a tender spot I couldn't yet touch directly, but around it, something else was growing, a sense of possibility, of agency, of life continuing in unexpected ways. Tomorrow would bring my first day at Sweetleaf, my first step into not just physical independence, but financial self-sufficiency. The thought both terrified and thrilled me. At an age when most people were settled into retirement routines, I was embarking on a new career, however modest. I fell asleep that night to the unfamiliar sounds of Margot's house, the creak of old wood, settling, the distant hum of the refrigerator, the soft padding of what I assumed was her cat moving through the hallway. Strange sounds, yet somehow comforting, the soundtrack of a life in progress, still being composed note by note. The alarm jolted me awake at 4:00 a.m., an ungodly hour I hadn't seen since Bradley was an infant with colic. Outside, the world was still dark, the street silent. I dressed quickly in jeans and a sweater, wrapped my new scarf around my neck, and crept downstairs, trying not to wake Margot. To my surprise, a light was already on in the kitchen. Margot sat at the table, a steaming mug in front of her. "You're up early," I said, startled. "I'm always up with the birds," she replied. "Old teacher's habit, never could break it." She nodded toward the coffee pot. "Fresh made. Help yourself." I poured a cup gratefully. I didn't expect anyone to be awake. "First day jitters?" she asked, a knowing smile playing at her lips. "Is it that obvious? You've got that look. Like you're heading to the first day of school with new shoes and a lunchbox." She took a sip from her mug. "You'll do fine." Her confidence steadied me. "Thank you. For everything. Go knock 'em dead," she said. "Or since it's a bakery, maybe just knock 'em well risen." The walk to Sweetleaf took 15 minutes, the streets eerily quiet in the pre-dawn darkness. As I approached, I saw lights already on inside, a figure moving behind the windows. My stomach tightened with nervous anticipation. When was the last time anyone had expected something from me, beyond a birthday cake or babysitting? When had I last been measured by what I could contribute, not just what I could give? I took a deep breath and knocked on the glass door. Daniel looked up from where he was arranging bowls and smiled, gesturing for me to come in. "Right on time," he said, unlocking the door. "I like that." The bakery smelled of yeast and warmth. In the kitchen, doughs were already rising in plastic-covered bowls, and the large ovens radiated heat. "We start the sourdough and some of the enriched doughs the night before," Daniel explained, handing me an apron. "This morning we'll shape those, plus mix the quick breads and pastries." He paused. "I know it's a lot to take in at once. Just watch today, help where you can, and ask questions. You'll get the hang of it." The next 5 hours passed in a blur of flour, butter, and precise movements. Daniel was patient but exacting, showing me each step with clear demonstrations. Lisa, the young woman who managed the front counter, arrived at 7 to set up the display cases. By 8, the first customers were lining up for fresh bread and morning pastries. Despite my age, my hands remembered how to work dough. Years of baking for family gatherings had given me an intuitive sense of when a mixture was right, when bread was properly proofed. What I lacked in speed, I made up for in attention to detail. "Not bad for a first-timer," Daniel commented as I finished shaping a tray of croissants. "You've got a good touch." The praise, simple as it was, warmed me more than I expected. By the time my shift ended at 10, I was exhausted but exhilarated. My feet ached, my back protested, and flour dusted my hair, but I felt more alive than I had in years. "See you Thursday," Daniel said, as I hung up my apron. And here, he handed me a paper bag containing a loaf of sourdough and 2 chocolate croissants. Employee perks. I walked home slowly, savoring the morning sun on my face. People hurried past, absorbed in their own routines, while I existed in a bubble of quiet satisfaction. I had contributed something tangible today, helped create food that would nourish strangers. It wasn't world-changing, but it mattered in its own small way. Margot was in the backyard when I returned, kneeling in a vegetable garden I hadn't noticed before. "How'd it go?" she called as I approached. "Challenging," I admitted, "but good. I think I might actually be able to do this." She sat back on her heels, brushing dirt from her hands. "Course you can. They wouldn't have hired you otherwise." She eyed the bakery bag. "That looks promising." We shared the croissants on the back porch, watching birds flit between the trees. The pastry was buttery and flaky, the chocolate just bitter enough to balance the sweetness. "I helped make these," I said, still somewhat amazed. "My hands did this." Margot gave me a curious look. "When's the last time you created something for yourself, Ruth? Not for your family or someone else, just for your own satisfaction?" The question caught me off guard. I thought about my garden in Tucson, which had started as a personal project, but gradually became focused on growing vegetables Bradley's family liked. I thought about my quilting, abandoned years ago when Vivian made it clear she found the designs old-fashioned. Even my baking had centered around others' preferences. "It's been a while," I admitted. "Thought so." Margot dusted crumbs from her hands. "That's the thing about being a mother, a wife, a grandmother. We get so used to shaping ourselves around others that we forget we exist independent of those roles." Her words resonated painfully. "How did you avoid that trap?" She laughed. "Who says I did? After my divorce, I had to relearn who I was when I wasn't busy being Doug's wife or Melissa's mother. Took years." She stood, stretching. "But it's worth it. Trust me on that." The rest of the day passed quietly. I walked to a nearby grocery store, stocking up on a few essentials. I called the bank in Tucson and arranged for my accounts to be accessible online. Small, practical steps toward establishing my new life. That evening, I finally turned my phone back on, bracing myself for the barrage of messages. They came immediately, texts and voicemails from Bradley, increasingly frantic, then angry, then pleading. My brief message had only intensified his determination to find me. The most recent text read, "Mom, this is ridiculous. If you're upset about something, we can talk about it. Please stop this nonsense and come home." Nonsense. As if my feelings, my autonomy, my entire existence was trivial. How had I not seen it before? This dismissive attitude, this assumption that my needs were secondary, my decisions subject to his approval, it had been there all along, growing so gradually I hadn't recognized it. I composed a longer message. "Bradley, I am safe and well. I've secured housing and employment. This isn't a cry for attention or a tantrum. It's my choice to begin a new chapter of my life. I'll contact you when I'm ready. Please respect my decision." I hesitated before sending it, wondering if I should say more. Explain the airport incident, make him understand the hurt that had precipitated my departure. But what would be the point? If I had to explain why abandoning your elderly mother at an airport was hurtful, no explanation would ever be sufficient. I sent the message, then silenced the phone as it immediately began ringing. Tomorrow, I would look into getting a new number, creating yet another clean break with my past life. As I prepared for bed that night, I caught my reflection in the bathroom mirror. The face looking back at me was one I'd seen thousands of times, yet somehow different now. More animated, more present. My eyes, James had always said, were my best feature. A clear hazel that changed with my moods. They seemed brighter now, more focused. "Who are you?" I whispered to my reflection. "Who are you becoming?" The question followed me into sleep, into dreams of open roads and distant horizons, of doors closing and windows opening. When I woke the next morning, I couldn't remember the details, but the feeling lingered, a sense of motion, of progress, of life unfolding in ways I never could have predicted. And isn't that what truly living means? Not the comfortable routine of known quantities, but the exhilarating uncertainty of what might be waiting just around the corner. At 75, when many would say my life was winding down, I was discovering it had only just begun. The next few weeks fell into a rhythm, each day adding another thread to the tapestry of my new life. I worked at Sweetleaf 3 mornings a week, gradually increasing my speed and confidence. Daniel proved to be a patient mentor, teaching me not just the basics, but the subtle art of bread making, how to tell when dough had fermented perfectly, how to shape a loaf for optimal rise, how to listen for the hollow sound of properly baked bread. "You've got good instincts," he told me one morning as I checked a batch of sourdough. "Some people bake by recipe. You bake by feel. That's rare." The praise buoyed me through the physical challenges of the job. My hands, stiff with arthritis in the mornings, loosened as I worked the dough. My back, initially protesting after hours of standing, gradually strengthened. At 75, I was developing calluses and muscle memory, my body adapting in ways I hadn't thought possible at my age. On my days off, I explored my new neighborhood. The community garden Elaine had mentioned became a favorite spot. Though it was late in the growing season, she welcomed my help harvesting the last of the summer vegetables and preparing beds for winter. "Were you a gardener back in Tucson?" she asked one afternoon as we dug sweet potatoes. "Yes, though desert gardening is quite different," I replied. "Here, everything seems to grow so easily. Just wait till spring," she promised. "I'll save you a plot. Nothing connects you to a place like growing food from its soil." The offer touched me deeply. It assumed continuity, permanence, that I would still be here when winter gave way to spring, when seeds could be planted with the expectation of seeing them mature. It was a vote of confidence in my new life, in my decision to stay. At home, Margot and I settled into a comfortable coexistence. We shared some meals, respected each other's privacy, and gradually revealed more of ourselves through casual conversations. I learned she had been divorced for 15 years after discovering her husband's affair with a younger colleague. Best thing that ever happened to me, she insisted. Forced me to figure out who I was without him. Turned out I liked that person better anyway. I told her about James, about the early happy years of our marriage, about his slow decline from cancer, about the loneliness that followed. You loved him, she observed. That's clear. But did you ever figure out who Ruth is without him? The question lingered with me for days. Who was I? Stripped of the roles that had defined me. Without James, without Bradley, without the familiar context of my Tucson life. Each day in Portland provided another clue, another piece of the puzzle. I discovered I enjoyed modern art. Spending hours at a small gallery Margot recommended, I found I preferred the bustle of the farmer's market to the sterile convenience of supermarkets. I realized I had opinions about city politics, environmental issues, social dynamics, topics I'd previously avoided as not my place to comment on. Slowly, tentatively, I was reclaiming my voice, the voice that had gradually been silenced over decades of accommodation and compromise. Bradley continued to text, though less frequently. His tone shifted from anger to bewilderment to reluctant acceptance. I responded sparingly, sharing little about my new life. It wasn't that I wanted to punish him. Exactly, rather, I needed this space, this separation, to become fully myself before I could engage with him as equals, rather than as mother and son, giver and taker. One unexpected joy was developing a friendship with Lisa, the young woman who worked the counter at Sweetleaf. In her late 20s, with vibrant tattoos and an ever-changing hair color, she seemed an unlikely companion for a 75-year-old woman, yet we bonded over a shared love of mystery novels and jigsaw puzzles. You're not like most older people I know, she said one day, as we shared lunch break. You're actually interested in new things. Maybe because everything is new to me right now, I replied. I'm seeing the world through fresh eyes. She nodded thoughtfully. My grandma used to say getting old was about loss, losing health, losing friends, losing purpose. But you seem to be gaining things. I am, I realized, every day. In late October, Daniel approached me after my shift. Ruth, I'd like to offer you a permanent position. Same schedule, but with benefits, health insurance supplement, paid sick days, employee discount. You've proven yourself valuable to Sweetleaf. Valuable? The word echoed in my mind. Not useful in the way I'd been to my family. A convenient babysitter, an unpaid cook, an emergency backup plan. But valuable for my skills, my reliability, my contributions. I'd be delighted, I said, meaning it completely. That evening, I celebrated with Margot by ordering takeout from a Thai restaurant we'd been wanting to try. As we sat at her kitchen table sharing fragrant curry and noodles, I found myself overwhelmed by a wave of gratitude. What's that smile about? Margot asked, noticing my expression. I was just thinking about how different my life is from what it was 2 months ago, I said. If someone had told me on that day at the airport that being abandoned would lead to all this, I never would have believed them. Margot raised her glass. To unexpected journeys. And to the courage to take them, I added. Later that night, as I prepared for bed, my phone buzzed with a text. It was from a number I didn't recognize. Grandma, it's Emma. Mom and Dad don't know I'm texting you. I got your number from Dad's phone. I miss you. Are you okay? Emma, my granddaughter. 14 years old, quiet and thoughtful, always with a book in hand. Of all my grandchildren, she was the one who seemed most like me. Observant, introspective, often overlooked in the family's bustling dynamics. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the message. This was the first contact from anyone in the family that felt genuine, uncomplicated by anger or expectation. Just concern from a child who missed her grandmother. I'm more than okay, Emma, I typed back. I'm happy. I've moved to a new city and started a new job. I'm safe and well. I miss you too. Her response came quickly. I knew something must have happened. Dad won't talk about it. Just says you needed space or whatever. But you wouldn't just leave without a reason. Perceptive child. I hesitated, uncertain how much to share. I didn't want to turn her against her parents or burden her with adult conflicts. But I also wouldn't lie. Your dad and mom left me at the airport the day of your Seattle trip, I wrote finally. They never came back for me. I waited 8 hours, then decided to make a new start somewhere else. There was a long pause before her next message appeared. That's really messed up. I'm so sorry, Grandma. It's not your fault, sweetheart. And I'm actually grateful now. It pushed me to make changes I needed to make. Can I visit you sometime? She asked. The question caught me off guard. Would Bradley allow it? Would I want to open that door yet? But I couldn't bear to disappoint this child who had reached out so bravely. I'd like that very much. Let's talk about it more. This can be our secret for now, okay? Okay. Good night, Grandma. I'm glad you're happy. I set the phone down, my heart full. The connection to Emma felt like a bridge between my past and present, not pulling me backward, but allowing something valuable to cross over. Perhaps in time, other bridges could be built, but they would be on my terms, leading to this new life I was creating, not back to the one I'd left behind. The first true Portland rain came in early November, not the gentle drizzle I'd encountered upon arrival, but a proper downpour that drummed against the roof and streamed down the windows. I stood at the dormer in my room, watching water cascade from the gutters, feeling strangely comforted by the gray skies and muted light. Winter's setting in, Margot observed when I came downstairs. Better get used to it. We won't see much sun until spring. Rather than feeling depressed by this news, I found myself looking forward to experiencing the full cycle of seasons in my new home. Tucson's eternal sunshine had its appeal, but there was something honest about weather that matched my mood, sometimes bright, sometimes somber, always changing. That afternoon, I received an unexpected visitor at Sweetleaf. I was wiping down counters, preparing to end my shift, when the bell above the door jingled. Looking up, I saw a man in his 60s, tall and slightly stooped, with a cane and a worn canvas jacket. Excuse me, he said, approaching the counter. I'm looking for Ruth Wilson. My heart skipped. Had Bradley hired someone to find me? Was this man here to try to convince me to return to Tucson? I'm Ruth, I said cautiously. He smiled, revealing a slight gap between his front teeth. I thought so. Howard Walsh. We met at your hotel when you first arrived in Portland. Had breakfast together. Recognition dawned. Howard? Of course. You recommended the library bulletin board. That's me. He seemed pleased, I remembered. I've been coming here for years. When Daniel mentioned his new baker was a recent transplant from Tucson named Ruth, I wondered if it might be you. I invited him to sit while I finished closing up. Howard, it turned out, lived just a few blocks from Sweetleaf and stopped in several times a week for bread and coffee. How are you settling in? He asked. Find a good place to live? I told him about Margot, the job at Sweetleaf, my growing familiarity with the neighborhood. Sounds like you landed on your feet, he said approvingly. Not everyone does, you know. Takes gumption to start over at our age. There was something comforting about talking with someone who understood the particular challenges of reinvention in later life. Howard had been widowed for 15 years, had moved to Portland knowing no one, had built a life from scratch. Hardest part is the evenings, he admitted. Days are fine, plenty to keep busy with. But evenings, that's when the quiet gets loud, if you know what I mean. I did know. Despite my growing friendship with Margot, there were still moments when the absence of familiar voices, familiar routines, pressed in on me. There's a group of us who get together Tuesday nights at the community center, Howard continued. Nothing fancy, card games, conversation, occasional potluck. Mostly folks our age. You'd be welcome to join. The invitation warmed me, another thread connecting me to this new place. another opportunity to expand my world. I'd like that, I said. Thank you. As Howard prepared to leave, he hesitated. Look, I hope this isn't too forward, but would you like to have coffee sometime? Not here, he gestured around the bakery. Somewhere else. Just to talk. Was he asking me on a date? The thought was so unexpected I almost laughed. I'd assumed that part of my life was long over, filed away with other youthful experiences. I'd enjoy that, I heard myself say. He smiled, suddenly looking younger. Saturday afternoon? There's a nice place on Hawthorne. We arranged to meet, and Howard left with a spring in his step, despite his cane. I finished closing up, my mind spinning. Was I ready for this? Did I even remember how to engage with a man as a woman, not as a wife or mother or grandmother? I mentioned the encounter to Margot that evening as we prepared dinner together. Howard Walsh? She mused, chopping vegetables. I know him from community theater, played a convincing Scrooge 2 Christmases ago. Good man, from what I hear. Retired engineer, volunteers with a literacy program. He asked me to coffee. I said, still somewhat bewildered. Margot's knife paused mid-chop. Like a date coffee? I think so. A slow smile spread across her face. Well, well, Ruth Wilson, breaking hearts already. I felt my cheeks warm. Don't be ridiculous. We're just two older people having coffee. Uh-huh, she resumed chopping. And I'm just growing prize-winning dahlias in November. Despite my protests, I found myself looking forward to Saturday with nervous anticipation. What would we talk about? What should I wear? Concerns I hadn't entertained in decades suddenly preoccupied me. When Saturday arrived, I chose my nicest sweater, a soft blue cashmere I'd treated myself to the previous week, and the silver earrings James had given me for our 30th anniversary. I applied makeup lightly, just enough to brighten my face without trying to disguise my age. Howard was waiting when I arrived at the coffee shop, a cozy place with mismatched furniture and local art on the walls. He stood when he saw me, a gesture from another era that touched me unexpectedly. You look lovely, he said simply. The next 2 hours passed in easy conversation. Howard told me about his career designing bridges, his 2 sons who lived on the East Coast, his discovery of community theater in retirement. I shared stories of my early marriage, my passion for gardening, my new adventures at Sweetleaf. Do you miss Tucson? He asked as we finished our second cups of coffee. Less than I expected to, I admitted. I miss certain things. My garden, a few friends. But the life I had there feels increasingly distant, like something I watched rather than lived. He nodded, understanding. After Helen died, I stayed in our house for 5 years. Everything there reminded me of her, of us. Coming to Portland was like taking a deep breath after being underwater too long. Yes, I said, grateful for the perfect metaphor. Exactly like that. When we finally parted, Howard walked me to my bus stop. I enjoyed this, he said. I'd like to see you again, if you're amenable. I'd like that too, I replied, surprised by how much I meant it. He hesitated, then leaned forward and kissed my cheek gently. Until next time, Ruth. As the bus carried me home, I touched the spot where his lips had brushed my skin. At 75, I was being courted. The thought was so unexpected, so contrary to everything I'd assumed about this stage of life, that I laughed out loud, earning curious glances from other passengers. Back at Margot's, I found her in the living room, working on a mosaic project. Tiny pieces of colored glass arranged in intricate patterns. Well, she asked, looking up from her work. How was coffee with Howard? Pleasant, I said, trying to sound casual. He's asked to see me again. Margot grinned. Told you. Breaking hearts. I rolled my eyes, but couldn't suppress a smile. This too was part of my new life. The possibility of connection, of companionship, perhaps even romance. Not a replacement for what I'd had with James, but something different, something uniquely suited to who I was becoming. Later that evening, I received another text from Emma. Dad's been talking about going to Portland to find you. Mom says to leave you alone. They argue about it a lot. The message disturbed me. I'd hoped Bradley would respect my wishes, would give me the time and space I'd requested. The thought of him appearing at Sweetleaf or Margot's doorstep, demanding explanations, trying to insert himself into the life I was carefully building, it filled me with dread. If he does come, I wrote back to Emma, please let me know. I'm not ready to see him yet. I will, she promised. Stay safe, Grandma. I sat with the phone in my hand long after our exchange ended. Would Bradley really try to find me? And if he did, what would I say to him? The hurt of that day at the airport had faded somewhat, replaced by a growing awareness that it had merely been the culmination of years of small dismissals, of being treated as an accessory rather than a person. But underneath that hurt lay something deeper. Love for the boy he had been, hope for the man he could become. Not for my sake, but for his own. For Emma's. For the family that would continue long after I was gone. Perhaps someday we could find a way forward together. But first, I needed to complete this journey of self-discovery. This process of becoming fully Ruth. Only then would I be able to face my son, not as a supplicant seeking approval, but as a woman standing firmly in her own power. The holiday season arrived with twinkling lights strung across Portland streets and evergreen wreaths adorning doors throughout the neighborhood. Sweetleaf bustled with customers seeking special breads and pastries for their celebrations. Daniel had me working additional hours, teaching me to make the bakery's famous panettone in Stollen. You've got a gift, he told me one morning as I shaped delicate star-shaped cookies. I've had trained pastry chefs who couldn't match your attention to detail. His praise no longer surprised me. I'd begun to recognize my own capabilities, to trust the knowledge accumulated through decades of home baking. This confidence extended beyond the kitchen, infusing other aspects of my new life. I joined Howard's Tuesday night group at the community center, finding a circle of contemporaries who shared similar experiences of reinvention in later years. Margaret had moved to Portland after retiring from teaching in Minnesota. Leo had come to live with his daughter after his wife's death, then found his own apartment when their personalities clashed. Teresa had left Florida after a hurricane destroyed her retirement community. Each had a story of ending and beginning, of loss and discovery. Together we formed a community of second acts, supporting each other through the challenges unique to starting over when society expects you to be winding down. Howard and I continued to see each other regularly. Coffee dates evolving into dinners, museum visits, even a community theater production where Margot played a feisty grandmother typecasting, she joked. Our relationship developed slowly, respectfully, neither of us rushing to define what was growing between us. I never expected this, he admitted one evening as we walked back from a concert, my hand tucked into the crook of his arm. At my age, I thought companionship was the best I could hope for. But this feels like more. It does, I agreed, the admission both frightening and freeing. We were both carrying past loves, past lives that had shaped us. James would always occupy a sacred space in my heart. Helen would always be part of Howard's story. But there was room, we were discovering, for new chapters, new connections that honored rather than replaced what came before. As Christmas approached, I faced my first major holiday away from family. In previous years, I would have been knee-deep in preparations, baking Bradley's favorite cookies, wrapping gifts for the grandchildren, ensuring everyone's traditions were respected. This year, the absence of those responsibilities left a curious void. "What are your plans for Christmas?" Margot asked one evening in mid-December. I hadn't really thought about it, I admitted. "What about you?" "Melissa and the grandkids are coming for a few days," she said. "You're welcome to join us. Fair warning though, 2 teenagers and a 7-year-old make for chaotic celebrations." The invitation touched me. "I'd like that, at least for Christmas dinner if that's all right." "More than all right," she assured me. "Melissa's been curious about my mysterious new housemate anyway." I sent modest gifts to Bradley's family, books for Emma, gift cards for the younger children. a hand-woven scarf for Vivian that I'd found at a local artisan market. No explanations, no lengthy notes, just simple presents with tags signed Love Grandma Ruth, a reminder that despite everything, they remained in my heart. Emma continued to text regularly, becoming my window into the family I'd left behind. Through her, I learned that Bradley had indeed looked into coming to Portland, but had been dissuaded by Vivian, who argued that forcing a confrontation would only push me further away. I was grateful for my daughter-in-law's insight, a surprising development in our complicated relationship. Christmas Eve found me at a candlelight service with Howard, the church filled with gentle music and the scent of pine. As we sang carols that had remained unchanged throughout my lifetime, I felt a profound sense of continuity amidst all the change. Some things persisted: the turning of seasons, the celebration of light in darkness, the human need for connection and meaning. Afterward, we walked through a neighborhood known for its elaborate holiday displays, houses glowing with thousands of lights, lawns populated with festive figures. "It's beautiful," I said, gazing at a particularly spectacular arrangement of lights synchronized to music. "Yes, it is," Howard replied. But when I turned, he was looking at me, not the display. Under a canopy of twinkling lights, with snow beginning to fall gently around us, he kissed me. Not the chaste peck on the cheek of our earlier encounters, but a real kiss, tender and questioning. When we parted, his eyes searched mine for a response. "Was that all right?" he asked, suddenly uncertain. In answer, I reached up and kissed him again, feeling like a much younger woman, while simultaneously aware of the wisdom our years had brought us. The knowledge that life is precious, moments matter, and it's never too late for joy. Christmas Day with Margot's family was indeed chaotic, filled with laughter, food, and the exuberant energy of children. Melissa, warm and creative like her mother, welcomed me without reservation. Her children, Jacob, 15, Lily, 13, and Max, 7, initially regarded me with the polite caution reserved for unknown adults, but soon included me in their games and conversations. As we gathered around the table for dinner, I was struck by how natural it felt to be part of this borrowed family celebration. No one treated me as an obligation or an afterthought. My contributions to the meal, bread and pastries from Sweet Leaf, a salad I'd prepared that morning, were received with genuine appreciation. "Mom says you're starting over," Melissa said, as we washed dishes after dinner. "That takes courage." "Or desperation," I replied with a smile. "Sometimes they look similar." She laughed. "Either way, it's impressive. I hope I have that kind of spirit when I'm your age." The comment, offered sincerely, reminded me how much my perspective had changed. Where once I might have dismissed such words as empty flattery, I now recognized their truth. What I had done, leaving everything familiar, building a new life from scratch at 75, was impressive. I had a right to feel proud of my journey, my resilience, my growth. Later, as Margot's grandchildren opened their gifts, my phone chimed with a text. Emma had sent a photo of herself wearing the hand-knit hat I'd included with her books. "Merry Christmas, Grandma. Miss you. Love the hat." I texted back, "Merry Christmas, sweetheart. It looks beautiful on you." A moment later, another text arrived, this one from Bradley. "Merry Christmas, Mom. We miss you. When you're ready to talk, I'm here." It was the first message from him that contained no demands, no subtle pressure to return, no implication that my choices were somehow wrong or selfish. Just an acknowledgement of absence, and an open door for when I chose to walk through it. "Merry Christmas, Bradley," I replied after some consideration. "Thank you for understanding. Love to all." It wasn't a reconciliation, not yet. But it was a beginning. A tiny bridge extending from both sides over the chasm that had opened between us. That night, in my room at Margot's, I stood by the window, watching snow continue to fall, transforming the neighborhood into a peaceful wonderland. I thought about how much had changed in the 3 months since that day at the airport. Not just my external circumstances, but my internal landscape. I had discovered strengths I didn't know I possessed, interests I'd never explored, aspects of myself that had been dormant for decades. I'd built meaningful connections with new people who saw me clearly, not through the lens of shared history or family obligation. I'd learned that age was not a barrier to growth, to adventure, to love. And I'd come to understand something profound about abandonment, that sometimes being left behind is the universe's way of forcing you forward, of clearing the path for a journey you needed to take but couldn't begin while safely tethered to the familiar. As snow blanketed the city, covering old landmarks and creating new contours, I felt a similar transformation within myself, not an erasure of who I had been, but a gentle reshaping, a softening of sharp edges, a highlighting of features previously obscured. I was still Ruth Wilson, wife, mother, grandmother, but now, also Ruth the baker, Ruth the gardener, Ruth the friend, Ruth the companion, Ruth the explorer, Ruth who was capable of so much more than she or anyone else had imagined. The new year arrived with a clarity I hadn't expected, a sense of purpose, of direction, of belonging in this place I'd chosen in a moment of both despair and courage. Portland was no longer just an escape. It had become home, its rain-washed streets and coffee shops and community gardens as familiar to me now as Tucson's desert landscapes had once been. In early January, I received a letter from Emma, a real letter handwritten on pale blue stationery, sent to my new address, which I'd shared with her in confidence. Inside, she'd enclosed a photograph I hadn't seen in years. James and me on our front porch in Tucson, much younger, his arm around my shoulders, both of us laughing at something off camera. "I found this in Dad's study," Emma wrote. "Thought you might want to have it. Also, I've been thinking a lot about what happened and what you're doing now. It's made me realize I don't have to just accept the future everyone expects for me. I can make my own choices, like you did. I'm applying to colleges Dad doesn't know about yet, ones with good art programs, not just business schools. Thank you for showing me it's okay to choose yourself." I held the letter for a long time, emotions washing through me in waves, pride in this thoughtful young woman, gratitude for her understanding, nostalgia for the moment captured in the photograph, and something else. A profound sense that my journey wasn't just for me, that its ripples were reaching others in ways I couldn't have anticipated. The thought that my granddaughter had found inspiration in my actions, that she was claiming her own path earlier than I had found the courage to claim mine, it gave my choices a meaning beyond personal fulfillment. Perhaps this too was part of growing older, becoming a beacon rather than just a bystander, showing by example that life continues to offer possibilities at every stage. I wrote back to Emma immediately, telling her how proud I was of her courage and independent spirit. I included some thoughts about finding balance, honoring family connections while still pursuing authentic dreams. It was advice I was still learning to follow myself. Winter settled fully over Portland, the short days and frequent rain creating a contemplative atmosphere. Howard and I continued to see each other regularly, our relationship deepening through shared experiences and honest conversations. We moved slowly, respectfully, both of us carrying decades of history that couldn't be rushed past or ignored. "I never expected to feel this way again," he admitted one evening as we walked back from dinner, the streetlights reflecting in puddles at our feet. "At our age, you think certain doors have closed permanently." "I thought the same," I agreed. "It's strange how life surprises you." In February, an unexpected opportunity arose at Sweetleaf. Lisa, who managed the counter, was leaving for graduate school, and Daniel approached me about taking on additional responsibilities. "You've proven yourself reliable and detail-oriented," he said. "I'd like you to train as assistant manager overseeing the front counter 3 days a week in addition to your baking shifts. It would mean more hours and a significant raise." I was momentarily speechless. 6 months ago, I'd been a retired homemaker with no professional experience outside raising a family. Now I was being offered a management position. "Do you think I can handle it?" I asked, genuinely uncertain. Daniel looked surprised. I wouldn't offer if I didn't. You've got excellent people skills, you know our products inside out. And customers respond well to you. The only question is whether you want the additional responsibility. Did I? The position would mean more income, more independence, more integration into the community I was growing to love. It would also mean less free time for exploring Portland, for developing my friendship with Margot, for seeing Howard. I'd like to try, I said finally. If you're willing to be patient while I learn, that's settled then, Daniel said with a smile. Lisa will start training you next week. I walked home that afternoon with my mind buzzing, barely noticing the cold drizzle that had been falling all day. At 75, I was embarking on a career advancement. The absurdity and wonder of it made me laugh out loud. Margot was in the kitchen when I arrived, preparing a stew that filled the house with savory aromas. Her cat, Professor named for his serious expression, wound around my ankles in greeting. You look pleased with yourself, she observed, looking up from chopping vegetables. I told her about Daniel's offer. Assistant manager. Look at you, climbing the corporate ladder, she teased, but her eyes were warm with genuine pride. We should celebrate. I'll invite Howard for dinner this weekend. The casual way she included Howard in our plans touched me. Over the months, he had become a regular presence in our household, joining us for meals, helping with small repairs, bringing books he thought I might enjoy. Margot treated him with the easy acceptance of a friend, never making me feel self-conscious about this late-blooming relationship. As winter gave way to early spring, Portland revealed yet another face to me. The city seemed to awaken from hibernation. Cherry trees exploded into bloom, daffodils appeared in parks and gardens. People emerged from their homes with visible relief at the lengthening days. In the community garden, Elaine made good on her promise, allocating me a small plot where I could grow vegetables and flowers. I spent peaceful hours there, hands in the soil, learning the rhythms of Pacific Northwest gardening with its abundant rain and moderate temperatures, so different from the harsh conditions of desert horticulture. You've got good instincts, Elaine commented one afternoon as we worked side by side. Some people fight against what the land wants to do. You listen to it. Her words echoed what Daniel had said about my baking, that I worked by feel rather than rigid formulas. Perhaps this was wisdom that came with age, this ability to attune myself to the subtle cues of dough or soil, to collaborate rather than impose. With spring came another milestone, my 76th birthday. In Tucson, the day had typically been marked with a dutiful phone call from Bradley, and perhaps a restaurant dinner, where the conversation inevitably turned to his work or the children's activities. This year, to my surprise, Margot organized a proper celebration. Nothing fancy, she insisted when I protested. Just a few friends, good food, maybe some music. The few friends turned out to be a gathering of everyone I'd connected with since arriving in Portland. Howard, of course, Daniel and Lisa from Sweetleaf, Elaine and other gardeners, members of the Tuesday night community center group, neighbors from our street. Margot's living room and kitchen overflowed with people who 6 months ago had been complete strangers but now formed the web of my daily life. They brought modest gifts, a handmade ceramic mug from a local potter, gardening gloves, a book of poetry, a potted herb garden. But the real gift was their presence, their genuine celebration of my life continuing, evolving, flourishing in this new soil. As I looked around at these faces, some lined with age like mine, others young and smooth, all smiling with authentic warmth, I was struck by how different this birthday felt from any in recent memory. There was no sense of obligation, no undercurrent of being tolerated or accommodated, just genuine connection, mutual respect, shared humanity. Howard raised a glass. To Ruth, he said simply, who reminds us that courage has no expiration date. The toast brought unexpected tears to my eyes, not from sadness, but from a profound recognition of how far I'd come, how much I'd grown since that day in the airport lounge, when I'd felt invisible and discarded. Later, when most guests had departed and Margot was seeing the last neighbors out, Howard and I sat together on the back porch. The evening was mild, the garden illuminated by strings of lights Margot had hung for the occasion. "Happy birthday, Ruth," he said, taking my hand in his. "I'm so glad you chose Portland." "So am I replied, meaning it completely. He hesitated, then reached into his pocket and withdrew a small box. "I have something for you. It's not. Well, just open it." Inside was a delicate silver bracelet with a single charm, a tiny bread loaf. "It's beautiful," I said, genuinely touched. "I thought it represented your new beginning," he explained. "The way you've created something nourishing from simple elements." As he fastened it around my wrist, I was struck by the tenderness of the gesture, the thoughtfulness behind it. Howard saw me, not as I had been or as society expected a woman my age to be, but as I was becoming. "Thank you," I said, and kissed him under the twinkling lights. The next morning, I received a text from Bradley. "Happy birthday, Mom. Hope it's a good one. We miss you." Simple words, but they represented progress. Acknowledgement without demands, recognition of my separate existence. I sent a brief reply, sharing that I'd had a lovely celebration with new friends. I didn't mention Howard or my promotion at Sweetleaf. Those parts of my life weren't ready to be shared with my son yet, though I told Emma about both in our regular exchanges. As spring deepened into summer, my life in Portland solidified in ways both practical and emotional. I signed a formal rental agreement with Margot, committing to stay for at least another year. My position at Sweetleaf expanded beyond assistant manager to include developing new recipes for seasonal offerings. Howard and I settled into a comfortable rhythm of spending time together while maintaining our independent lives and home. In July, Emma came to visit, a week-long stay that Bradley reluctantly permitted after extensive negotiation. At 16, she was legally old enough to travel alone, and her determination to see me eventually wore down her father's resistance. I met her at the airport, my heart pounding with anticipation and a touch of anxiety. Would she find me changed? Would she understand the choices I'd made? Would this new version of Grandma Ruth disappoint her? She emerged from the security area, taller than I remembered, her dark hair cut in a stylish bob, eyes scanning the crowd. When she spotted me, her face lit up with a smile that erased all my concerns. She ran the last few steps and enveloped me in a fierce hug. "Grandma, you look amazing." We chattered nonstop on the bus ride to Margot's. Emma, eager to share her college research, art projects, and high school dramas, me equally eager to introduce her to my new world. Margot welcomed her warmly, showing her to the daybed in the small sewing room that would be her accommodation for the week. Howard came for dinner that first evening, somewhat nervous about meeting my granddaughter, but quickly charmed by her open curiosity and genuine interest in his stories. Throughout the week, I showed Emma my Portland Sweetleaf, where she decorated cookies with Daniel and charmed the regular customers, the community garden, where she helped harvest summer vegetables, the art museum, where she lingered for hours in the contemporary galleries, the coffee shops and bookstores, and riverfront parks that had become my regular haunts. "You seem so different here," she observed one afternoon as we sat by the Willamette River, watching boats pass. I don't know, alive. "I feel more alive," I admitted. "It's as though I was slowly fading away in Tucson without even realizing it." She nodded thoughtfully. "Dad doesn't get it. He keeps saying you had some kind of breakdown or something, but I can see it wasn't that at all. You just finally started living for yourself." Her perception touched me deeply. It took me a long time to learn that lesson. "I'm learning it earlier, thanks to you," she said, leaning her head against my shoulder. On her last evening, after Margot tactfully made herself scarce and Howard had said his goodbyes, Emma and I sat at the kitchen table over mugs of hot chocolate. "Dad wants to know if you're ever coming back," she said finally, addressing the elephant that had lurked at the edges of our wonderful week. I sighed. "Not to stay. Portland is my home now, but I might visit sometime, when things feel less complicated. He feels really bad, you know." About the airport. She traced patterns in the condensation on her mug. He won't admit it directly, but I can tell. He gets this look whenever anyone mentions airports or Seattle. Good, I said, then immediately regretted the harshness. I don't mean that vindictively. But actions have consequences. He needs to understand that. Emma nodded. Mom says it was a wake-up call for him, that he'd gotten used to treating you like you didn't have feelings or needs of your own. The insight surprised me. Vivian had always seemed so absorbed in her own world, so dismissive of mine. Perhaps she too had been doing some reflecting these past months. When you go home, I said carefully, you can tell your father that I'm open to talking. Not right away, but soon, when we're both ready. Emma's face brightened. Really, that would be awesome, Grandma. But, I continued, I need him to understand that I'm not the same person who left. I won't go back to being taken for granted, or treated as an afterthought. I've built a life here that matters to me. I'll tell him, she promised. And I'll make sure he understands. After Emma returned to Tucson, I found myself reflecting more deeply on the possibility of reconciliation with Bradley. The anger and hurt that had driven my initial departure had mellowed over time, replaced by a more nuanced understanding of our relationship, its flaws. Yes, but also its importance in the larger tapestry of my life. Bradley was my only child, the living legacy of my marriage to James, the connection to my past, and my future through Emma and her siblings. I didn't want to sever that tie completely, yet I was unwilling to sacrifice the hard-won independence and self-respect I'd established in Portland. Could there be a middle way? A relationship based on mutual respect rather than obligation? Meaningful connection without unhealthy dependence? I didn't have clear answers, but I was beginning to believe such a balance might be possible. Not immediately, but gradually, through careful navigation and honest communication. In late August, I took another significant step in establishing my Portland life. I became an official tenant in Margot's house, moving from the guest room to a renovated apartment in her finished basement. It had its own entrance, a small kitchenette, a living area, bedroom and bathroom, everything I needed for independent living while maintaining the connection to Margot's household that had become so important to me. You're not getting rid of me that easily, I told her as we celebrated the move with a bottle of wine in my new space. I'll still be upstairs bothering you regularly. You'd better be, she replied. Professor would never forgive me if you disappeared. The cat in question was curled on my new sofa, having already claimed it as his secondary domain. The basement apartment represented another evolution in my journey, neither the complete dependence of my initial arrival, nor a total separation from the support system that had nurtured my new beginning. It was a middle ground, a balanced position that honored both my need for autonomy and my appreciation for community. This balance extended to other areas of my life as well. My relationship with Howard deepened without consuming all my time or energy. My work at Sweetleaf remained fulfilling without becoming all-consuming. My friendship with Margot offered companionship without the enmeshment that had characterized my family relationships in Tucson. For perhaps the first time in my adult life, I felt properly calibrated, giving and receiving in appropriate measure. Nurturing connections without sacrificing myself, standing firmly on my own feet while still reaching out to others. In September, almost exactly 1 year after that fateful day at the Tucson airport, I received a letter from Bradley, not an email or text, but a handwritten letter on heavy stationery, the kind used for important communications. I took it to my favorite spot in the community garden, a bench under an apple tree now heavy with ripening fruit, with hands that trembled slightly. I opened the envelope. Dear Mom, he had written. I've started this letter a dozen times over the past year, and never found the right words. Maybe there aren't any right words for what I need to say, but I'll try anyway. I'm sorry. Deeply, genuinely sorry for what happened at the airport, and for all the times before that, when I treated you as less important, less valuable, less worthy of consideration than you are. Emma's visit to Portland opened my eyes to how much you've changed, how much you've grown in your new life. She came back full of stories about Grandma Ruth the baker, the gardener, the community member, the woman with a boyfriend. That one was a shock, I admit. I realize now that I never really saw you as a complete person with your own dreams and needs. You were always Mom, the person who took care of everyone else, who could be counted on to fill in the gaps, who never complained, who always said yes. I took advantage of that, we all did, without ever considering what it cost you. What happened at the airport was inexcusable. Vivian and I had argued that morning about bringing you on the trip. She thought we should have been honest from the start that we couldn't afford an extra ticket, but wanted to visit you in Tucson instead. I couldn't face telling you the truth, so I created this elaborate deception, thinking somehow it would work out, or you wouldn't mind, or I don't know what I was thinking, honestly. When we realized what we'd done, I was too ashamed to face it directly. Then too angry when you disappeared. Then too worried. Then too proud to admit how wrong I'd been. It's taken me a year to work through all those emotions and reach the simple truth. I hurt you terribly. And I am sorry. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect you to come back to Tucson. I don't even expect a response to this letter. I just wanted you to know that I understand now, at least a little better. And I am trying to be a person worthy of having you in my life again. In whatever way feels right to you. With love and regret, Bradley. I sat for a long time after reading the letter, watching bees navigate the late summer flowers, feeling the weight of history and possibility resting in my hands. Bradley's words seemed sincere, his insight genuine. This wasn't a manipulative attempt to reclaim control or pressure me to return. It was an acknowledgement of wrongdoing and a step toward potential healing. I wouldn't respond immediately. This letter, like our relationship itself, deserved careful consideration. But for the first time since leaving Tucson, I could envision a future that included Bradley, not as the center of my world, but as an important part of the rich, multifaceted life I had created for myself. That evening, as Howard and I walked along the riverfront, watching the sunset paint the water in shades of gold and pink, I shared Bradley's letter with him. "What are you thinking of doing?" he asked after reading it. "I'm not sure yet," I admitted. "Part of me wants to protect this new life I've built, to keep it separate from the past. But another part recognizes that true independence means I can choose to reconnect without losing myself." Howard nodded thoughtfully. "You know, one of the hardest lessons I learned after Helen died was that letting new people and experiences into my life didn't diminish what came before. It just added more layers, more depth." "Yes," I said, seeing the parallel. Reconnecting with Bradley wouldn't mean erasing this year or going backward. It would just be adding another dimension to who I am now. "And who you are now is pretty remarkable," Howard said, squeezing my hand. As we continued our walk, I found myself reflecting on the strange, winding path that had led me to this moment. From abandoned traveler to independent woman, from invisible grandmother to valued community member, from someone defined by others to someone defining herself. The journey hadn't been easy. There had been moments of doubt, of loneliness, of wondering if I'd made a terrible mistake. But standing here now, with the river flowing beside me, and the hand of a good man warm in mine, with meaningful work awaiting me tomorrow, and a home of my own to return to tonight, I knew with absolute certainty that I had made the right choice. I hadn't been abandoned at that airport. I had been released, set free to discover who Ruth Wilson truly was when she wasn't being someone's wife, someone's mother, someone's grandmother. Free to learn that at 76, life wasn't ending but continuing to unfold in ways both surprising and beautiful. And that, perhaps, was the greatest discovery of all, that it truly is never too late to choose yourself.